Life of Dwight L. Moody, Chapter 7, being read by Peter John Parisi, also known as Brian Dean. City Missionary Work. The compiler of a city directory is not expected to act as a historian, but the variety of occupations there accredited to Mr. Moody between 1858 and 1869 is not without significance. He had arrived in Chicago too late in 1856 for his name to appear in the directory of the succeeding year. And the first record is found in 1858, when he was in the employ of Mr. Wisewall. This item reads, Moody, Dwight L., Clerk, Boards, 255 Wabash Avenue. A year later, it is Salesman, C.H. Henderson and Company, Boards, 81 Michigan Ave. And in 1860, Mr. Henderson having died, he is entered as Salesman, View, Hill, and Granger, Boards, 81 Michigan Avenue. From this time on, the agent recorded him first as a librarian in the Young Men's Christian Association, then as a city missionary, and in 1865 he is entered as a pastor of Illinois Street Church. In 1867, his occupation is designated as President, Young Men's Christian Association. In the last entry, in 1872, is as Superintendent of the North Side Tabernacle. Mr. Moody was always a law unto himself in the independent and unusual way in which he entered Christian work made it difficult for the directory agent to place him exactly. So, for want of a better title, he was librarian, city missionary, or pastor, as the case might be. The truth of the matter was that Mr. Moody had laid up sufficient money to support himself for some time, and entered Christian work without a salary, turning his back upon an income of over $5,000 a year at the age of 24. During the first year, he received about $300 from friends who had become interested in his work, and by strict economy, he hoped to make his savings last some years. Beyond that, he planned for nothing, for he felt confident that since the Lord had called him to the work, he would support him in it. If such support should fail, moreover, he could go back to selling shoes. Had not St. Paul made tents while he preached the gospel? And so he began his work. That with no board at his back, no society to guarantee his salary, his dependency was on God. Beginning his mission work with children, he had gradually, as has been described, gained access to their homes and unconsciously entered regular evangelistic work before he knew it. It would be difficult to state exactly when he began that special service in which, later, he became so widely known, as it was rather a developed gift than an ability suddenly displayed. To aid him in his visiting, Mr. Moody bought a little Indian pony, known as his missionary horse. The pony was, of course, a source of special enjoyment to the children, and by giving rides to the younger ones, was made to contribute to the popularity of Moody's Sunday School, as the North Market Hall School had now come to be called. It was not an uncommon sight to see him on one of his missionary trips with one or two children behind him on the horse, a little one in his arms, and more crowding about seeking the next turn. Many stories are told of that wonderful pony. Among others, how Moody, riding at full speed, seized a rather boisterous, mischievous boy who had been throwing stones at him, and lifting him up by the coat collar, placed him across his saddle and carried him 2 or 3 blocks, securing thereby his lasting respect. In those days, young Moody did not always receive the sympathy and respect which came to him only as the reward of years of trial and many critical experiences. Writing of those early days, his friends and most intimate associates in evangelistic work, Major D.W. Whittle, thus describes him. It must have been in the spring of 1859 that, as I was passing up Clark Street in Chicago, someone on the sidewalk said, "There goes Crazy Moody." I turned, looked down the street, and saw a young man of about 21, short and stocky in figure, weighing about 150 pounds. He was riding a small pony, his trousers in his boot legs, a cap on his head, and as I watched him, he reined out to the sidewalk in front of the Methodist block at the corner of Clark and Washington Streets. I was 2 years younger than Mr. Moody and had been in Chicago since April 1st, 1857. We were both from the Connecticut Valley in Massachusetts, but had known nothing of each other in the East. I had been interested in some degree in the revival meetings of 1857 and 1858, and had heard how Moody was visiting houses, building up a mission school, talking to people on the streets, and doing all sorts of eccentric things. The newspapers were full of jokes about him, and he was called by the reporters Brother Moody. Like many others, I had the impression that he was crazy. How little I thought, as I looked at him that day, that my life would be influenced by him and his wonderful career. It was during his last summer, as we were talking of the death of Norman Williams, whose funeral he had recently attended, that we spoke of those early days when he was first known Mr. Williams. At that time, his ambition had been to become one of the successful merchants of the city. He had devoted himself with great energy to go ahead of all the band of young men with whom he was associated, to sell more goods than any of them. There was only one of them but what I felt I could equal, and that was Mr. Marshall Fields, he used to say. It was just at this time that he won the heart of the one who 2 years later became his wife. It is not permitted the writer to offer to one still living the credit that her heroism, faith, and affectionate devotion deserves, but it will be simply stated that in Emma C. Revell, Dwight L. Moody found his greatest human resource. To her wise counsel he gave more heed than to that of any other, and he never failed to express in those nearest him the inestimable debt he owed to, quote, "the best wife God ever gave to a man," unquote. It was when he had renounced worldly ambitions and, contrary to the advice of all his friends, had launched out into what was considered a wild undertaking, that she, a girl of only 17, promised to cast in her lot with his, a promise fulfilled 2 years later by their marriage in 1862. Her educational advantages had been greater than his, and she became his most able assistant in every undertaking. No trial was so severe, no burden so heavy, that he could not find in her one whose fellowship afforded the warmest sympathy, and whose faith and self-sacrifice could be counted on. In many ways she served to balance his impetuous nature, and he would often acknowledge the helpful service her judgment had been, and regret on occasion that he had acted without first consulting her. Although Mr. Moody now gave a great deal of time to evangelistic meetings, sometimes speaking himself, but more often securing other speakers, he did not neglect the recruiting of students for his Sunday school, and to keep the interest from flagging, he had recourse to every device for sustaining its popularity. He used to make much of picnics, entering into the spirit of them with as great zest as the youngest child. He was not only an unusually strong man, but also a very fast runner. At one of those picnics he picked up a barrel nearly filled with apples, and holding it so that the apples would spill out, he ran ahead, followed by the boys who gathered up the fruit as it dropped. Among the premiums for good conduct and regular attendance one summer session, 13 boys were promised a new suit, each at Christmas, if they would regularly attend until that time. Their descriptive names were indicative of their social status, which may be judged from the following list: Red-Eye, Smikes, Mad the Butcher, Jackie Candles, Kilbericks, Billy Buchanan, Darby the Cobbler, Butcher Lyre, Greenhorn, Indian, black stovepipe, old man, and rag breeches candidate. All but one fulfilled the conditions, and Mr. Moody had them photographed before and after the donning of the suits. The pictures entitled Does It Pay? And It Does Pay. This uniformed group became known as Moody's bodyguard. 13 years later on, one of Mr. Moody's friends called at a railway ticket office. The agent, after looking at him curiously for a moment, asked him to step inside and said, "You do not seem to know me." "No, I have not that pleasure." "You know Mr. Moody's bodyguard?" "Yes, I have a picture of them at home." "Well," said the agent, "when you go home, take a square look at the ugliest of the lot, and you will see your humble servant, now a church member and heir to Mr. Moody in that work." As the success of his evangelistic efforts began to be noticed, Mr. Moody was addressed by friends in other cities, soliciting his aid in behalf of wild or disconcerted young men who had wandered to Chicago. Letters were received from all parts of the country in which parents, brothers, sisters, and friends pleaded with him to look up some wanderer and do what he could to save them, and no such appeal was made in vain. A friend, in describing his personal feature of Mr. Moody's work at this time, says, "At one of these Sabbath evening services, I saw one of the most distinguished lawyers of Illinois, from the heart of the state, sitting by the side of his son, who had been snatched as a brand from the burning by the earnest appeals and prayers of Mr. Moody. The lawyer had written to Moody to save his son, if he could. Words cannot tell of the work accomplished in those days, nor describe the intense earnestness of the audiences, nor the enthusiastic singing of the old evangelistical hymns and the Sabbath school tunes. If ever the Lord was praised from full hearts, it was at these meetings." It was natural that a man so practical as Mr. Moody should have had a strong desire to see definite results. These were times when he became depressed if he failed to see immediate conversions, but he had lessons to learn here as in other matters. In a characteristic story, he describes how he learned to put away doubt and discouragement. "One Sunday," he says, "I had preached, and there did not seem to be any result. On the Monday I was very much cast down. I was sitting in my study, brooding over my want of success, when a young man who conducted a Bible class of 100 adults in my Sabbath school called upon me. As he came in, I could see he was away up on the mountaintop when I was way down in the valley. He said, 'What kind of a day did you have yesterday?' 'Very poor. I had no success. I feel cast down.' 'How did you get on?' 'Oh, grandly. Never had a better day.' 'What was your subject?' 'I had the life and character of Noah.' 'Did you ever preach on Noah?' 'Did you ever study up his life?' 'Well, no. I don't know that I ever made it a special duty. I thought I knew pretty well all there was in the Bible about him. You know, it is all contained in a few verses. If you have never studied it before, you had better do it now,' he said. 'It will do you good.' Noah was a wonderful character. When the young man went away, I got out my Bible and some other books and read all I could find about Noah. I had not been reading long before the thought came stealing over me. Here is a man who toiled on for 120 years and never had a single convert outside his own family. Yet he did not get discouraged. I closed my Bible. The cloud had gone. I started out to a noon prayer meeting. I had not been there long when a man got up and said he had come from a little town in Illinois. On the day before, he had admitted 100 young converts to church membership. As he was speaking, I said to myself, I wonder what Noah would have given if he could have heard that. He never had any results from his labors. Then, in a little while, a man who sat right behind me stood up and said, I wish you would pray for me. I would like to become a Christian. Thought I to myself, I wonder what Noah would have given if he had heard that. He never heard a single soul asking God for mercy, yet he did not get discouraged. I have never hung my harp on the willows since that day. Let us ask God to take away the clouds and unbelief. Let us get out of doubting castle. Let us move forward courageously in the name of our God and expect to see results. It is of these early days that Dr. H.C. Mabie wrote, I first met Mr. Moody in the fall of 1863 in Chicago. I had come into the city from my Illinois home on a farm to enter the old University of Chicago as a student. I was then 16 years old, having been introduced to Mr. B.F. Jacobs of Chicago and Mr. R.J. Osgood of Indianapolis, even then famous Sunday school men and deeply interested in boys and young men. I was by them taken down to the Methodist Church block to visit, for my first time, the daily noon prayer meeting of the Young Men's Christian Association. This had become a famous meeting. It was conducted mostly by young laymen, the first meeting of its sort I had ever attended. As we passed in there was a stocky, bustling, Simon Peter sort of man standing at the door and shaking hands with all who entered. He spoke an earnest word to each. At the close of the meeting, the same man remained to speak and pray with an inquirer or two who had shown signs of interest during the meeting. This honest man was Mr. Moody, and it made an impression upon me for life. I had never before seen a layman so making it his business to press men into the kingdom as he seemed to be doing. I had learned to expect that of ministers, but I had never seen a layman so dead in earnestness, but I liked it. The entire uncommonness of the thing impressed me, and created in me a yearning to learn the divine art if it were possible. The cause of the Union appealed to me most strongly, for by all the traditions of his home and his New England training he was an ardent and abolitionist. During his stay in Boston, he frequently listened to the eloquence of such orators as William Lloyd Garrison, Wendell Phillips, and Elijah P. Lovejoy. His uncle's boot and shoe store on Court Street was opposite the courthouse, and there he joined in the mob that attempted the liberation of Anthony Burns, a fugitive slave. On this occasion, the hot-headed youth of Boston were dispelled by the soldiers' musketry, but the event left an impression even greater than the eloquence of Faneuil Hall. Later, when an employee at Wistwell Boot and Shoe Store, the clerks from neighboring houses, who met frequently with Mr. Moody and his fellow salesmen, constituted themselves into a likum, where the points of political difference between the North and South were warmly discussed by representatives of both sides. In spite of all this, he could not conscientiously enlist. There has never been a time in my life when I felt that I could take a gun and shoot down a fellow being. In this respect, I am a Quaker, was his explanation. At the same time, he was alive to the opportunity for doing good offered by the military camps, and at once assisted in forming an Army and Navy Committee of the Young Men's Christian Association, consisting of J.V. Farwell, B.F. Jacobs, and himself. Later, this work was affiliated with the Northwest branch of the Christian Commission. The first Christian work undertaken by the Commission consisted of services held among the soldiers that passed through Chicago. On forming of Camp Douglas, a work was organized which resulted in the erection of a small temporal chapel in which over 1,500 meetings were held. Edgar W. Hawley, who was among Mr. Moody's oldest associates in Christian work in Chicago, thus describes the beginning of the work. At one time, there were about 12,000 men there. Regiments were coming in and others were going to the front all the time. The Young Men's Christian Association had a chapel for the use of the men, where frequent meetings were held. The West Branch of the Christian Commission included among its members R.V. Farwell, J.B. Jacobs, or J.F. Jacobs, Mr. Moody, and several others. We issued an Army hymn book with an American flag on the front page, and it was distributed freely among the soldiers. We visited the tents and barracks and found the men playing cards and proposed to exchange our hymn books for the cards. The soldiers agreed quickly enough. Indeed, so numerous were these exchanges that several of the Young Men's Christian Association rooms were filled with playing cards, which the men had surrendered. This camp was finally struck, the men having all gone to the war. General Grant had captured Fort Donelson and taken 10,000 Confederate prisoners, of whom about 9,000 were sent to Chicago and placed in Camp Douglas with a regiment of our men as guards. It was a period of popular apprehension, and the people of the city were very nervous. A week afterwards, at the close of a Union prayer meeting, Moody said to me, "Hallie, let us go down and hold a meeting there in the chapel with the prisoners." It was about 5 miles down to the camp, and as we got near the entrance, Moody said, "Hallie, here is a ministerial pass. Take it. But how do we get in past the guard?" "In some way," was the confident reply. The guard pressed me right in, but Moody was hailed by fixed bayonets. "Stand back," came the stern order. "I am Moody, the president of the Young Men's Christian Association," he explained to the soldiers. "I don't care who you are. You can't get in here." At that moment, a captain who was passing stepped up and recognized the evangelist. To him, Moody appealed. "Let me in," he urged, "for the work's sake." The officer turned to the guard. "Let one of your men take Mr. Moody to headquarters. I will be responsible." We marched in, Moody under military guard. On the matter being explained at headquarters, the officer in charge said, "Well, seeing you are here, and considering your object, you may stay, but don't repeat it. If you are not out of here by 8 p.m., you go into the guardhouse for the night." We went to the chapel, arranged things, and invited the men. It was so packed full. Turning me with a twinkle in his eye, Moody said, "Now, Haley, you preach." I remonstrated and said I wasn't a minister. "But you came in on a ministerial pass, and I didn't," he persisted. So I quietly acquiesced, and we had an interesting service. Mr. Moody took charge, and it seemed as though the Spirit of the Lord came down upon these men with great power. They came forward to the altar, 20, 30, 40 at a time. We closed the meeting and began inquiry work. Moody had the platform, and God used him wonderfully. The whole audience melted, and we saw strong men in tears. "God is here," Moody whispered to me. We looked at our watches. It was but a few seconds to 8, and we had to run to get out of the camp, having no notion of passing a night in the guardhouse. These meetings we kept up 2 or 3 weeks, and many were converted. We formed a Young Men's Christian Association branch at the camp, and there were many kind expressions of gratitude, even from the higher officers, who were greatly pleased with the work. In a letter to his mother at this time, Moody wrote, "I am now at work among the soldiers a good deal. I had a good time in Kentucky. The boys wanted to have me become their chaplain, but my friends would not let me go, so I shall remain in the city. I would like to see you all and talk with you about my Savior, who seems so near to me. Oh, what would life be without Christ? I sometimes get to looking down on this world of sin, but when I look to Jesus, it makes me look up." By gospel services, prayer meetings, song services, distribution of Bibles, books, and tracts, and by personal visitation, he tried to win the soldiers to Christ. He organized the Christians into bands of brothers who were to carry the banner of Christ with them and be loyal to one another and to the divine captain. The experiences gathered from this work constituted most efficient training for his later career as an evangelist. His sermons showed many an evidence of the Christian commission work in the numerous illustrations drawn from his interviews with the soldiers. Even camp phraseologists left a permanent influence upon his vocabulary, and in organizing large conventions or conducting evangelistic campaigns, he would call upon some workers to reinforce another, and would urge his associates to press the fight all along the line. The particular surroundings and impressive conditions under which the work was conducted made it necessary to urge his hearers to accept immediate salvation, and this was ever afterwards a conspicuous feature of his manner of address. With wounded men hovering between life and death, or with men on the march resting in some place which they would have to leave the next day, it was, at least as far as he was concerned, the alternative of now or never. As he would not allow himself or them to be satisfied with never, he bent his whole energies to now. He was on the ground ministering to the wounded after the battles of Pittsburgh, Landing, Shiloh, and Marshfield. He was with the army at Chattanooga and among the first to enter Richmond. It was after one of these battles that the following incidents occurred, which Mr. Moody himself frequently related. We were taking a large number of wounded men down the Tennessee River after the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing. A number of young men of the Christian Commission were with me, and I told them that we must not let a man die on the boat that night without telling him of Christ in heaven. You know, the cry of the wounded man is, "Water, water." As we passed along from one to another, giving them water, we tried to tell them of the water of life, of which they would drink. They would never die. Of which if they would drink would never die. I came to one man who had about as fine a face as I ever saw. I spoke to him, but he did not answer. I went to the doctor and said, "Doctor, do you think that man will recover?" "No. He lost so much blood before we got to him on the field that he fainted while we were amputating his leg. He will never recover." I said, "I can't find out his name, and it seems a pity to let him die without knowing who he is. Don't you think we can bring him to?" "You may give him a little brandy and water," said the doctor. "That will revive him, if anything will." I sat down beside him and gave him brandy and water every now and then. When I was waiting, I said to a man nearby him, "Do you know this man?" "Oh, yes, that is my chum." "Has he a father and mother living?" "He has a widowed mother." "Has he any brothers and sisters?" "Two sisters, but he is the only son." "What is his name?" "William Clark." I said to myself that I could not let him die without getting a message for that mother. Presently he opened his eyes, and I said, "William, do you know where you are?" He looked around a little dazed and said, "Oh, yes, I'm on my way home to Mother." "Yes, you are on your way home," I said, "but the doctor says you won't reach your earthly home. I thought I'd like to ask you if you had any message for your mother." His face lighted up with an unearthly glow as he said, "Oh, yes, tell my mother that I died trusting in Jesus." It was one of the sweetest messages I ever heard in my life. On return to Chicago, Mr. Moody at once looked up the widowed mother and the two sisters and delivered the message from the dying soldier. As he was leaving the house, one of the sisters, only a child at the time, came to him and gave him the small savings of her sister and herself, with the request that he purchase a Bible to give to some soldier. When he went back to the front, Mr. Moody related this incident, asking who wanted that Bible, and there were a number of petitions for it. Soon after God called the children to join their brother. But not till their childish ministry had been used as a blessing to many as soldiers. Another war incident that Mr. Moody frequently repeated occurred after the Battle of Marshfield. "I was stationed in the hospital," he said. "For 2 nights I had been unable to get rest, and being really worn out on the 3rd night, I had laid down to sleep. After midnight I was called to see a wounded soldier who was very low. At first I tried to put the messenger off, but he told me that if I waited till morning it might be too late. So I went to the ward where I had been directed, and found the man who had sent for me. I shall never forget his face as I saw it that night in the dim, uncertain candlelight. I asked what I could do for him, and he said that he wanted me to help him to die. I told him I would bear him in my arms into the kingdom of God if I could, but I couldn't. Then I tried to preach the gospel. He only shook his head and said, "He can't save me. I have sinned all my life." My thoughts went back to his loved ones in the north, and I thought that even then his mother might be praying for her boy. I repeated promise after promise and prayed with the dying man, but nothing I said seemed to help him. Then I said that I wanted to read to him an account of an interview that Christ had one night here, while on earth, an interview with a man who was anxious about his eternal welfare. I read from the 3rd chapter of John how Nicodemus came to the Master. As I read, his eyes became riveted upon me, and he seemed to drink in every syllable. When I came to the words, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life," he stopped me and asked, "Is that there?" "Yes," I said. "Well," he said, "I never knew that was in the Bible. Read it again." Leaning on his elbow on the side of the cot, he brought his hands together tightly, and when I finished, he exclaimed, "That's good. Won't you read it again?" Slowly I repeated the passage the 3rd time. When I finished, I saw that his eyes were closed, and the troubled expression on his face had given way to a peaceful smile. His lips moved, and I bent over him to catch what he was saying, and heard in a faint whisper, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, and whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." He opened his eyes and said, "That's enough. Don't read any more." Early next morning, I again came to his cot, but it was empty. The attendant in charge told me that the young man had died peacefully, and so that after my visit he had rested quietly, repeating to himself now and then that glorious proclamation, "Whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." The following description of one of the journeys Mr. Moody took to the scene of battle is sent by a friend. During the winter and spring of 1861 and 1862, I was a medical student in the city of Chicago and saw Mr. Moody almost every day as he was hurrying about, busily engaged in his good work. That was in the early days of the Young Men's Christian Association, and he was looked upon as one of the most active promoters of that association. The great battle of Pittsburgh Landing was fought on Sunday and Monday, the 6th and 7th of April, 1862. The news reached Chicago on Tuesday, the 8th, and on Wednesday morning a call came for physicians and nurses for the wounded. For the supply of both was entirely inadequate for the work to be done. Accordingly, the Young Men's Christian Association was called upon to send as many nurses as possible, and I, being a medical student, was invited to be one of the company. A special train was made up by the Illinois Central Railroad Company, and by 5 or 6 o'clock Wednesday evening, we were at the depot ready to be off. Our train was a heavy one, carrying about 60 or 75 physicians and about 300 nurses, besides many supplies. I had a seat in the center of the car, which was comfortably full. When we were 2 or 3 hours out of Chicago, and everyone was getting settled down in a seat for the night, we had no sleepers then, I was aroused by a gentle tap on my shoulder, and asked if I would not attend Mr. Moody's prayer meeting, which was then to be held in the front end of the car. I wasn't a Christian then, and I didn't go, but nevertheless my conscience gave me a stinging rebuke, and I was set to thinking. In the forward end of that car was Mr. Moody, engaged in conducting a prayer meeting. In the rear end was a company of men playing a game of cards. I couldn't help realizing the wonderful zeal of the man in his great work, and how earnest and how careful he was that no duty be neglected, no opportunity lost. We reached Cairo on Thursday, April 10th. We were transferred from our train to the steamer, and soon on our way up to the Ohio and Tennessee rivers. When evening came, the passengers were sitting about in groups in the large cabin. Mr. Moody, with his Young Men's Christian Association assistants, passed through the crowd and again invited the men to attend prayers in one corner of the large room. There again he conducted the service. I don't remember seeing anything more of the card players. As on the first evening, so on the next. I didn't attend prayers, but I remember that among those who didn't, there was no effort made to disturb the meeting, nor was any evidence of disrespect shown as far as I could see. On Friday afternoon, about 3 o'clock, we reached Pittsburgh Landing, and were at once sent to the different steamers that were standing there, loaded with hundreds of wounded soldiers waiting for our arrival, and so we scattered in all directions. I saw no more of Mr. Moody during that trip, but have thought of this circumstance many, many times, and of the intense Christian zeal by which he was always impelled. Many an instance is related of Mr. Moody's enthusiastic admiration of heroism, and this was, of course, accentuated when there was the added quality of outspoken loyalty to Christ. Such a soldier Mr. Moody recognized in Major Whittle, who was then a lieutenant in the 72nd Illinois. After the Battle of Vicksburg in 1863, this young officer was sent home severely wounded. His popularity in the city called forth a great demonstration in Chicago on his return. The American Express Company, in whose service he had been engaged, sent their employees with a band of music in all their wagons to escort him from the station. A few days later, Lieutenant Whittle was asked to make a speech at a patriotic rally, where a number of prominent men had been invited to speak. Referring to this occasion, Major Whittle says, "I, a boy of 21, was put forward to speak with Bishop Simpson on the platform behind me, waiting to give his address. I was weak from my wounds and felt foolish at being in such a position. Directly in front of me, in the center of the hall, a sturdy young man jumped to his feet and cried, 'Give him 3 cheers.' I recognized the face of Mr. Moody as he led the cheering with great enthusiasm. This manifestation of sympathy nerved me for the few words that followed, and I have often thought it was a specimen of what his courage, faith, and example have been to me all through his life. When I told him some time afterwards of how much good his sympathy had done me that night, and how vividly I remembered his earnest, determined look as he led the crowd, I was rewarded by his reply, 'I took you into my heart that night, and you have been there ever since.'" While serving with the command of General O. Howard, who was in thorough sympathy with his efforts, Mr. Moody's ministry was especially fruitful. General Howard thus speaks of his work in the Army. "Moody and I met for the first time in Cleveland, East Tennessee. It was about the middle of April, 1864. I was bringing together my 4th Army Corps. 2 divisions had already arrived and were encamped in and near the village. Moody was then fresh and hearty, full of enthusiasm for the Master's work. Our soldiers were just about to set out on what we all felt promised to be a hard and bloody campaign, and I think we were especially desirous of strong preaching. Crowds turned out to hear him. He showed them how a soldier could give his heart to God. His preaching was direct and effective, and multitudes responded with a promise to follow Christ. These wartime experiences introduced Mr. Moody to a larger field by bringing him prominently before the whole country. The Young Men's Christian Association noon prayer meetings in Chicago became a center where he and his fellow workers met and reported on their frequent excursions to the front, and people from all over the Northwest sent in requests for prayer at these meetings on behalf of husbands, brothers, and sons. When the Spanish War broke out and thousands of young men were again gathered into Army camps, Mr. Moody's heart went out towards them with the same longing that he had urged him on during the Civil War. His experiences in 1861 to 1865 helped him to arouse the churches in this new emergency. He became chairman of the evangelistic department of the Army and Navy Christian Commission, whose method of work was fourfold. 1. Preaching the gospel by well-known ministers and evangelists, to whom the men would listen. 2. The placing of Young Men's Christian Association tents within reach of every regiment, whether the men might go as a place of resort, and where they would find good reading and writing materials. 3. The free distribution of Bibles, Testaments, hymn books, and other religious books. And 4. The visitation of the sick and wounded in the hospitals. The following letter, which he wrote at this time, resulted in great blessing to thousands of soldiers in the great military camps during the summer of 1898. 30 years ago, war clouds gathered over our land, and the Church of God was aroused as I had never seen it since in behalf of the young men of America. This interest expressed itself in the formation of the Christian Commission, and everywhere efforts were made for the religious interests of the soldiers. Meetings were held everywhere, and many a camp became the scene of a deep and effective revival. And for more than 30 years I have been continually meeting men who were converted in those army meetings. Now the dark shadow of war again rests upon our land. Is it not possible that God intends to use even the darkness of this evil for the blessing of the youth of this land? And while He has called us to become the instruments of His justice way, He not have in store a season of revival for those who, brought face to face with danger and a realization of the seriousness of life, may be reached when at other times careless and indifferent? It seems to me that it is just the nick of time in which to reach thousands of young men with the gospel, either through a testament, a good book, or the spoken message. A minister in Philadelphia writes me that there is an excellent opportunity of doing good at Tampa, and I have no doubt that other camps offer equally favorable conditions. Mr. Moody was preaching in Pittsburgh with one of the first regiments started for Cuba. He mentioned that incident at the meeting and raised several $100s in order to follow these young soldiers with the gospel. Dr. Whittle, Dr. A.C. Dixon, Reverend R.A. Torrey, and others were sent. An appeal was made for money to send books as well as men. The Young Men's Christian Association also desired to send workers to the front, and the War Department, deciding that it could have only one religious body among the soldiers, an Army and Navy Christian Commission was organized, and Mr. Moody was made chairman of the evangelistic department. The object of the organization was to reach soldiers and sailors of the United States and the Army and Navy with the gospel of Christ. Bibles, religious books, colportage, library books, and the new Army hymn book, compiled by Mr. Sankey, were sent in great quantities. Major Whittle gave this incident among many, showing the very important nature of the work done through this agency. I called on a dying lieutenant this morning. He said that he was turned to God at the first meeting held in the camp. I did not know about it at the time, but my heart was full of gratitude to God as the dying man's face lit up in recognition of me. His hot hand pressed mine as he drank in. Him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. And other scripture passages. He told me that he did in his heart trust Christ. We sang to him, "My faith looks up to thee," and commended him to God in prayer. He has a wife and 5 children. He was a traveling man and unsaved up to the night of May 27th. The doctor said there was no help, that he would die today. If God has been pleased to use my coming here to save that one soul, I will praise Him through eternity. Another incident is given herewith. We spend our forenoons going to the hospitals. There are about 1,000 men at Chicka, it's Chickamaauga, in the various hospitals, sick with malaria fever and typhoid fever, and every day brings us to the bedside of some hungry, thirsty, dying soldier. One of our workers went to a hospital and asked, "May I go in and see the sick? Is there anything I can do?" "For God's sake, yes," said the surgeon. "Go with that woman. She has just arrived from the north, and I can't bear to tell her that her boy won't recognize her. He is dying. He won't live 5 minutes. Go in with her." So he went in and stood by the cot where the soldier was breathing his last. He couldn't recognize his mother, and this mother, a lady dressed in black, stood there at the foot of the cot, watching the last breath of her dying boy. And when at last his soul had gone, she turned back the sheet that covered him, and there upon his army shirt was the badge of the Epworth League. He had had it transferred from his soldier's coat to his shirt. He told the nurse he wanted to wear that badge when he was dying. As his mother looked upon it, she burst into a sob, and the whole tent of sick soldiers and the doctors and nurses sobbed with her. And what a privilege it was for our delegate to tell that mother, "I was here yesterday and talked with your boy. I had been speaking with this man here about being a Christian, and your son overheard it. And when I came to his side, he said to me, "Oh, dear me, how can that man get along without Jesus?" I said to him, "Are you a Christian?" With a smile upon the young man's face, he said, "You bet I am." And he turned back the sheet and showed him the badge upon his breast. And I talked with him and prayed with him.